Peter, can we wait a little bit for other people to get on, or is it like a hard start at 12?
Oh, you can, yeah, you can wait until
Okay, because
for
I
more
think
people
we
to.
have a number of, um, we have some folks, one, two, three, four. We have four more, I think, based on what I'm looking at. There's Jess. So now it's three. Hi, Jess. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Just want to make sure everybody could hear and we could hear them. Hi, Henry.
How are you doing, everyone?
Good. How are you?
Good afternoon. Happy New Year, everybody.
What do you think, Gary? Couple more minutes?
Just give them like to 5 after, which is 3 more minutes, and we can start off by introducing everybody,
Okay.
introduce ourselves, and that'll add another few more minutes to it.
Okay. Okay.
And the people that come on will be the unknowns.
Okay. I'm sure there's people on YouTube also.
Yeah. We can probably get started. I don't think the next 20 seconds is going to make a big difference.
Okay. All
Good
right.
timing.
We're recording. Okay. All right, Gary, you want to start and then I'll go and then we can name whoever we see on our screen and they can introduce themselves. Sound good?
Sounds good. First of all, my name is Gary Moore, and I'm a professor and department chair of Health and Movement Science at Southern Connecticut State University. I am an athletic trainer myself. I've been an athletic trainer, sorry to say, for 40 years already. and I'm serving as the co-chair of this committee. So I introduced myself. So I guess the next one on the list would be Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Torillo, and I'm an athletic trainer here in Connecticut. I've dabbled in a few different settings. My 20th year of being a licensed athletic trainer, and still in this point of my career as a private practice owner now. My passion is still the adolescent athlete and ensuring that they have the proper care in their sports setting. And I'm looking forward to be a part of this group.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Arliss Mayer.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Arliss-Meyer. I'm a primary care sports medicine doctor. I have worked as chief of athletic medicine at Yale, as well as head team physician at Yale for their varsity sports, currently in private practice. I serve the local high schools, Hillhouse, Cross, and West Haven, as their team physician. I also work with University of New Haven, Southern, and Albertus Magnus as their athletic their PCSM, sometimes their athletic trainer, as well as Quinnipiac now. I also work with US Soccer for team physician as well. Have close relationships with athletic trainers over the years. I'm not going to say how long I've been in business, so thank you.
Henry. Thank you, Stephanie.
Good afternoon, everyone. Henry Rondon. I am Assistant Executive Director here at CAS CIAC. I'm filling in for our Executive Director today, Glenn Lungarini, who is down in Florida with the other Executive Directors from around the country. And in my role here, I serve as a sports liaison for baseball, softball, ice hockey, cross country, indoor track, and outdoor track.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Peter, do you want to introduce yourself or?
Hi, my name's Peter Kolakowski. I'm the public health clerk, and I'll be helping in administrating this committee or task force.
Thank you, Peter. Jessica's next.
Hi, everyone. I am Jess Testani. I am the current Connecticut Athletic Trainers Association president. I have been an athletic trainer I'm going on my lucky number 13th year, I believe. I have covered most settings, I think, in those 13 years. I started off with Division I, then went to professional soccer, did a little with US Soccer, and then came back home, and I have mainly focused on the secondary school level, both public and private. And currently I'm in an administration position for advanced physical therapy, where I am the leader of the athletic training program there that hires athletic trainers for secondary schools.
Very good. Thank you, Jessica. Andrew.
My name is Andrew Abraham. I'm currently the athletic trainer at Glastonbury High School. When we were creating this task force, I was in a management position similar to Jess at Select Physical Therapy, where I had managed athletic trainers upwards around 30 or 40. And then recently I've just changed over to the secondary school Board of Ed hire position. So I think I'd be able to provide some insight on both sides, as that was my experience for the last 7 years as a certified athletic trainer.
Very good. Thank you, Andrew. Sarah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Montati. I am the designated representative from the Department of Public Health. I work in the Practitioner Investigations Unit, and I was an athletic trainer for 10 years before I made a career change into the public health sector. I worked in the secondary school setting.
Okay. Bob.
Hi, my name is Bob McKee. I'm the District Athletic Director for Meriden Public Schools. I oversee Platt High School and Maloney High School. I've been in this role for approximately 2 years as district, previously roughly just 8 years as the Maloney Athletic Director.
Right. And we'll end up with Lenny so she can start right into the intro.
Hi, Eleni Diaco-Georgiou. It's nice to meet everybody, and thank you again for kind of joining us and talking about the athletic training issues and solutions that we can all come up to together. I'm currently the program director for the Masters in Athletic Training program at UConn. And I've worked in, name a setting, and I've worked in it probably at this point. And I've been an athletic trainer for over 20 years now. So definitely looking forward to this. And thanks again. So I guess in the essence of time, and we know that everybody's really busy, but we really want to open the floor and kind of hear from everybody today and gather people's thoughts as then we try to collectively come up with solutions. So we'll start kind of with, I guess I'm going off the agenda, what we see as the statement of the problem. So, Gary and I have chatted a little bit with the CATA executive board, some other program directors, and just kind of collectively with athletic trainers across the state. And these are kind of things that we've been hearing for a few years now. So as everybody knows, we had COVID a few years ago now. And at the same time that we had COVID, a lot of our programs were transitioning from a bachelor's level program to a master's level program. So we were kind of in a storm of transition where, we saw the number of athletic trainers professionally decreased, but also the number of students decreased because of that transition. So we kind of had two things rolling at one time where we saw a decrease in athletic training student-wise and professional-wise. So, the main reason we're here today is because we have some unfilled positions in the state, and our number one priority is making sure that the public and our kids and the athletes and, all those that athletic trainers in all different settings, from the high schools to the emergent settings to the professional and collegiate settings, that people are being taken care of. So we want to make sure that we can come up with some solutions to help fill these gaps that we're seeing to kind of hit our broader goal as healthcare professionals and everybody on this call to help protect those and to provide that health and safety. So student debt is another thing that, we've heard some folks talking about. So really, I think those are kind of the things that we've heard of and have been able to collectively kind of bring together as some of the kind of the issues that we're seeing throughout the state, kind of like on a more, state level. So we did want to give everybody a chance to, and Gary, chime in whenever. But we did want to give everybody a chance, and that's why we wanted to bring in folks from different settings to kind of hear from you what you see as some of those issues, what are some of those retention issues or hiring issues or whatever the case may be, to kind of filling those positions that we have that are open, and then also keeping those positions filled once we do fill them.
Right. And one of the nice things we have about this committee right now is most of you are from different settings, and each of you will bring a certain thought to it. Obviously the high schools are the hardest hit right now, but there's also occupational settings, the collegiate settings. Pretty much everybody is looking for somebody right now and can't fill. A quick search of the positions available revealed 20 positions that are full-time in Connecticut that are currently open and unfilled. That doesn't count the numerous per diem positions that are being hired to sort of fill in the blanks where people aren't available. Some statistics as far as numbers. In 2024, I only have 4 universities I'm counting because Quinnipiac is dropping their program. But in 2024, there were, 21, only 25 athletic training graduates in the entire state. Now, of the 25, I went back over a 3-year period from 2022 to 2024. There were 42 athletic trainers over this 3-year period that graduated. Only 21 of them remained in Connecticut. A lot of them might have gone on to maybe a doctoral degree. Some of them went into greener pastures where the pay might be better. Some of them actually went home because they were coming here as out-of-state students. But based on what we're seeing is the numbers that are coming out are not going to meet the demands of the profession going on forward. So I think one of the things, I know we have the high schools and represented, all of you are in a situation where you were probably involved in the hiring or seeking out of athletic trainers. So we wanted to get your perspective so we can put this into the task force report before it goes forward to the Public Health Committee. Should I just select somebody at first, or
I have thoughts. I always have thoughts.
Okay, go ahead. You could start us off, and just Jen, just restate the setting kind of that you're representing for the task force, and I think that could help everybody kind of
Yes.
keep, the context if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, my name is Jen. I'm currently an athletic trainer as a self-employed private practice owner. And I currently operate as a solopreneur. And I got to this place because of unsettledness in the market of working in traditional athletics. So I have two kind of pain points that I hear. One is that we have a decrease in students that are applying to go to athletic training education programs, and a decrease in professionals. So from that, I see a few different questions. We know, most of us know why people are leaving the profession. It's burnout, it's salary, it's, at the end of the day, an uneven energy exchange. Okay. And so what I mean by that is people typically get into athletic training, and I'm speaking to for myself and others that I've spoken to. You get in because you have a passion for healthcare. You want to take care of people, use a certain skill set, and then you're drawn to this active population because maybe it's something that you've experienced personally. You were injured and you're like, gosh, this person was really impactful. So we go into our education with this excitement of, I'm going to give back, I'm going to take care of people. But we're seeing, as we get into those roles, that energy exchange isn't what we expected. We're not maybe communicated with. We might not be treated as a part of the team. Changes in practice times, changes in games. I know all of us have probably experienced things like that in the past. And the issue with not being seen as a healthcare provider. So when jobs are meant to be created, it's seen as a budget line item. And I know, Andrew, you've been through Glastonbury, going through the clinic outreach model to Glastonbury. Here in Newington, where I'm from, we just did the same thing. And it's taken 20 plus years, because I was an athletic trainer at the high school over 20 years ago. And it takes time to prove value when we don't know how valuable we are. So I think one of the biggest pain points for athletic trainers is, again, having an expectation of what we expect our role to be and look like. And it's just not coming to fruition. So it's not attractive to either put the time and energy and excitement, and then it's just not reciprocated in the particular job roles. And certainly is possible, but few and far between. And I guess one of my other pain point questions is, why are people choosing athletic training in the first place? So I guess if we go back to our why, and then we look at why are they not coming back, I guess that's one of the things that we need to kind of question. Why do we get into athletic training? And either why don't they stay, or why is it not attractive anymore? Why are people not being drawn to this? That's all I got.
Yeah, well, hey, and on that, Jen, I think I know exactly the struggles in Newington. I was part of that managing group trying to manage that contract, and seeing an ebb and flow of a school district that was not able to come to the table financially for many years, and then come to the realization that they have to come to the table financially for their student athletes' health and safety. I think that's what I saw most frequently in the last 3 years, and especially in my last position, managing staff, managing contracted athletic trainers and those contracts. As we had to increase value to attract and retain athletic trainers, we had schools that were at times unwilling to go that direction with us. So we would leave, and then you'd see that school post a position for double the contracted price in a year, looking for an athletic trainer. And it's, I think that was, for me, part of the reason I'm where I am today, is because that's a frustrating side of the street to be on, when you're bashing your head against the wall, proving your value day in, day out. And then as soon as somebody leaves, then they realize how valuable you are, right? That's just what we saw in probably 6-7 different school districts that ended up hiring internal, which is good for the profession, but challenging for retention of athletic trainers, because we had to shuffle athletic trainers around during that process.
These are great points. Yep, I think we can keep collecting info and then maybe we can answer any questions or if someone can answer. Is that a good plan, Gary? We can
Sounds
just
good
let
to me.
everybody- Yep, everybody keep this. These are great. So keep going.
So I want to speak a little bit from the physician's perspective, because for us athletic trainers as sports physicians, just the relationship with your athletic trainer and taking care of your individual athletes is just so very important. And I don't think even our own doctors in the state know this. Certainly the Board of Ed doctors don't know it. The school nurses don't understand it. And I think that speaks to Jennifer's speaking about the appreciation of what the value of that person is. So that's an educational point that we could be better at. We also have recognized, those that us know for athletic trainers, the value of a certified athletic trainer. So we've taken them away from the field side. We've offered positions in the offices so that they actually can be our healthcare extenders because they're very good at that job, which is good, but it also dilutes the field for the field side kind of care that we get. And as private practices and university practices, we can offer benefits and more money and things like that. So we've made the pot sweeter in certain parts of the profession, which is good, but it also takes away from the parts that need to get done. And what I've heard a lot of for people that I've interviewed and people that have left college-based athletic training particularly, it's a lifestyle issue. It is a huge suck to be every weekend, every night, when you're short-staffed, especially because you're filling in and you don't get the days off. And I know when you go into athletic training, you know that's what you're getting into, because that's also what you love is the nights and the weekends. But if you don't get a break, if you don't have people that can kind of step in and share the load, you can get very burnt out very quickly. And if you're also kind of worried about finances and everything else, it just adds to that. And if you start to like have a family and try and do all of those things, it becomes challenging. And I think that's not an easy solvable problem, but when we put in alternatives like Amazon or an office-based practice, and you can go 8 to 4 and not work weekends and get paid and have benefits, we're going to lose that profession to these other alternatives.
Yeah, I think those are really great points. I think it also speaks to, the NATA put out their white pages of a national survey that they sent out to talk about stuff like this and speaking to when we're talking about the secondary school specifically, they put out a white page survey of 25% of athletic trainers are leaving the secondary school or plan to leave the secondary school setting. 28% plan to leave the athletic training profession altogether. Some of the consistent things that we're talking about come down to the compensation, right? Like we can say compensation is a reason for a lot of things, but in athletic training specifically, when you talk about the compensation not changing for 20, 25 years in most places, and then the things that we've also talked about with perceived value of the athletic trainer. We talk about our why I went into athletic training so that I can be able to care for student athletes and patients to the best of my ability. But when I can't provide that care because I have a lack of either perceived value of what I can do, whether that's coming from the public, the Board of Education, the nurse at the school that I'm working with, or lack of support from the administration that I'm with, and then you throw in the work-life balance of what we're talking about with the nights and the weekends of that traditional setting, I start to lose my why, which is what like Jen was talking about. So compensation is one thing. But if all of those pieces to the puzzle are starting to dwindle down in one place, then eventually my why is going to be, tarnished by all these other factors. So we talk about compensation, we talk about consistency, I think too, with both compensation and with care, and coming across, so like, how do we bridge that gap? Support from administration and perceived value, the work-life balance, and then the consistency across the board with all of these things. So I think it all goes into it. And then that's where people start to jump and say, I can't do this anymore. I got into it because I love it and I love to provide care. Nobody goes into healthcare for the fame or the notion of it, because we're not going to get that. We're going to stand behind our athletes while they raise their trophies, and we're going to consistently do that for our patients and for everything, and that's what feeds our souls. But if our souls are being crushed by all those other pieces of the puzzle, plus we're not being compensated for it, and I can't be there. One of the things that stick out into my mind when I had to make a choice, I was at a private school in Connecticut, and I was there for 5 years, and I had to work for that perceived value. I had to not only be an athletic trainer, and Jen knows this because we were in similar positions. We were not only athletic trainers, we were anatomy and physiology teachers. We proctored study halls. We had to advise kids. We had to do all of these other things that made up our one position to create a livable wage to be an athletic trainer. And on the other end of it, I was a young mother who came home one day and saw my 3-year-old that said, "Oh, hi, Mom." And it was like a knife to the chest because I was all of those things. I went in at 7 a.m. and I stayed until the last basketball game got out at 9:30. And sometimes that would happen 3 days in a row. So while what I did fed my soul, because if anybody knows me, they know I love my job and then they love my career choice. But that crushed me. Whereas I then went into the physician practice setting so that I could see my kid and she couldn't dive that knife right through my chest. I got back out because of how passionate I am about fixing this in Connecticut and creating positions and creating a model that allows athletic trainers to be who they want to be and feed their souls and get compensated and get all of those things, which is why we're sitting here. But it's very, very difficult when you're constantly hit with puzzles pieces that you can't control. That hopefully, bridging the gap in some of these areas, a secondary school board of ed might not ever be able to compete with a position that could be created at an Amazon, or something else. But how can we? I think is the question. How can we bridge the gap so that our whys are a little bit louder than the crushing puzzle pieces that we're facing right now?
Bob, you sort of have the different point of view because you're coming from the part of administration. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so prior to being a district AD, I was just at Maloney, and I had an athletic trainer who was at the school for maybe over 20 plus years. We talk about consistency. It's like that security blanket, someone who knows everybody, the community. And then you hear, what Andrew and Jess and Jen are saying about, some of the issues that come up, the work-life balance, the burnouts. He started to have a young family. And so he is, it's easy when you're an infant, but when they start getting older in activities, you get those pressures. So he was having a very, very hard time struggling with it. And, he was the only person there. And so he told us, he goes, "This is going to be it for us." I'm like, oh my goodness. It's someone that you're so used to. And Platt, who's the other school in town, they always seem to have a different person every 2 years. They never had that consistency. They're always changing their model, like same company, but it just didn't have that consistency of that same person. So for me, it was like a shock. And so, so I was expecting both schools were expecting new people and coming in for that coming year. And 2 weeks before football season starts, we get the letter saying our services are going to be done in 2 weeks. We can't fulfill a athletic trainer for you guys for the upcoming year. So here I am, used to having someone for so many years, and now I have nobody. That became like, oh no, what are we gonna do? So that's when I just started making a lot of phone calls to any of the companies that might service, and you heard everyone talking like we didn't know one available. I've luckily got very, very lucky with the company I got with, just because we were childhood friends, and I didn't know he had a company, and it all worked out. It was like a perfect storm, and then I had Jess came and, presented to our board, just talking about like, hey, here's your avenues. You go you can hire someone through the board, like what Andrew's doing, or you go through the company, and have a contract and just weigh out the options, and just trying to educate us because we were paying in that old type of system, right? The old schedule. And now we had this much bigger number that was coming at us. And so trying to sell that and, and educate everybody, and everybody was on board, which, we immediately, jumped in on the contracts with both schools and locked us both in for 3 years. But, yeah, it's definitely, scary, and I know at times that we'll be playing schools and there won't be anybody on our sidelines, so our athletic trainers are servicing 2 teams, at times. So, I see both ends of it.
Do you see, Bob, any solutions? I mean, thoughts as we move forward? Or should we wait to the end, Eleni?
I was gonna say, let everybody, if anybody else wants to
Okay,
voice their concerns or kind of what they're seeing as an issue. And then I think we can start with the solutions, or maybe not solutions, but what we think would help. And then we could start to formulate, okay, what can this task force do to get those solutions moving and filling some of these positions? Does that sound
Okay.
like a good plan?
sounds like a plan. So Henry, what are your thoughts on the
Oh,
CIAC? I'm sorry, did I cut somebody off?
Sure.
No, hey, I'd love to hear from Henry.
Sure. And obviously for us, number one priority in education-based athletics is, before you get these student athletes on the field, is making sure that those venues in themselves, that they're safe, that they're in a venue that they can go out and perform at the highest level. But of course, it has to be in a safe environment. I guess from the feedback that I'm getting, I think I always go back to the initial issue, and that is the lack thereof either programs that are in these different universities in the state, or the lack of students that are going into the program. So I guess at the end, I'll be interested to see what are the universities doing in terms of recruiting for these different programs to try to get more of these students interested in these particular programs and getting them into the field. Because obviously without that piece, everything else, whether it be compensation, the amount of hours that they're working, every other piece or any other solution that this task force can come up with, if the people aren't there, that becomes a major issue. And also it'd be interesting to see what other states are doing, and other universities in other states are doing to recruit more of these students into this profession. As you know, of course, obviously, we can go into the same deal and into schools in terms of how are we getting more educators to come into the field of education? How do we get more teachers? Because again, they're experiencing the same issues where you have different districts that are not filling all of their positions and are going in a good 50 teachers short into the school year. So I almost view them as having kind of a similar problem, that it's really, how are we getting people interested in these fields and getting them into these universities in the first place? Then you can almost go into, well, how do you solve that secondary issue of everything else that they're experiencing?
Jen? Thank you, Henry.
That's a really great point, Henry. And I don't obviously run an athletic training program. Obviously, Gary and Eleni have way more feedback there, but I've been a preceptor for athletic training students, and I've been a preceptor for many years. And some of the feedback, depending on the program where they come from, I was getting a sense of the undergrad was preparing them for athletic training as a stepping stone to PA, to PT, to something else. And I love being an athletic trainer. I do. I love my job. I love my profession. This is why I'm here. But some of the sense that I was getting from athletic training students is they were being prepared for not being an athletic trainer. So they would graduate and it was just what's next. I know not every program is like that, but that is something to consider, that the tone, or I'm not sure of the right word, is we want to produce athletic trainers. This is what this university does, is we turn out athletic trainers to become athletic trainers, not a physical therapist, not a PA, not a something else. So I think Henry's point about, that educational piece is something, to consider as we kind of list our pain points.
And we did chat with some of the program directors on purpose. So for those who don't know, in the state of Connecticut, there are 4 master's level programs. It's UConn, Eastern, It's UConn Central, Southern, and Sacred Heart University in Fairfield. So Quinnipiac had an undergraduate program. They're not making the transition to a master's. So when we wanted to collectively gather their thoughts, because like everybody is saying, like we need to have people coming through in the state, and then we need to keep them here. Like we want them to stay in Connecticut, especially if they're coming to our schools. We would love to then be able to say, okay, here's a great job for you in our state where you came to school, sort of thing. You should stay here and work versus going somewhere else. And I think, and Gary, you can add in if I forget anything, but collectively, they were saying a lot of the same things that we've heard here. So burnout, profession, there's not enough people to kind of offset, maybe alternating the nights and weekends, if there's 2 people out of site versus 1 person out of site, that could also help offset, especially at some of our because we have some pretty large high schools. The other things they were talking about was, when students go out to some of the settings, what they're seeing at those settings, then they're not wanting to stay in that type of setting because, again, of the burnout, the hours, et cetera, et cetera. And they also chatted a lot about the value. So like the students seeing the value and how the athletic trainer at a site is perceived. So, a lot of what we were talking about here, we are healthcare professionals, the value of the athletic trainer, the communication, the changes in the scheduling, like all those things are things that the students then see. So maybe when they're graduating, they may be looking for a different type of setting. Because I do think now that we're a master's, and what we're seeing, at least myself, we're seeing, and from folks I've talked to, if you're choosing to come to athletic training for a master's, it's the profession you're staying in after. Does that make sense? We have only a few that I've seen that want to do like PhD or something like that. I think that will start to increase as we get more students coming in. But as we've transitioned to the master's, I think we are seeing more folks who want to stay in the profession. And that might not be across the board. It's just what I've seen and, what I've heard from people. But a lot of the stuff that, the program directors were saying, again, was the communication, the increase the value, show the worth, and those sorts of things. So I know we had discussed possibly surveying alumni from all the program and asking, if you stayed in state, why'd you stay? If you left, why'd you leave? So we can maybe kind of collectively gather any themes that might emerge of why people are leaving and not staying here for jobs, because we have the jobs. So those are some things that, the higher ed kind of side of this chatted about on more information that we can gather. And I know we've reached out to KSI to get some information that they have maybe from the Atlas Project and some other, things that they've been spearheading. And I know Jess had reached out to NATA so we could gather more information on what other states have been doing, because there are other states that have formed task forces and then have put certain things into place to help draw people into their state and to stay in their state post-grad. So those are some things that we're trying to get some numbers on and some more information on. To then kind of fit them into all the issues, that everybody here, and maybe we could come up with some new solutions, kind of bringing all those factors together.
I think it's got to be important. We got to look at what can be controlled out of the scenario that we're in right now, because we have if we're looking at secondary school athletic training, it's a second shift job. So like that's not changing. So how do we negotiate with that being like the number one piece? Because I think there's still, and I know this because my wife is one of them. Like there are athletic trainers that do not want to work second shift for the entirety of their lives. So there is a shift at some point in their professional career where they decide that they need to get to a more structured 9 to 5, whether it's Amazon, it's a physician extender role, it's medical sales, or it's getting a teaching degree so they can get out of the profession entirely. It's being an EMT. It's like, how do we negotiate with that transition? Because that happens more frequently than not as families start. And that second shift is something that's just not going to change. So then, how do we increase? And the things like I'm hearing in my mind, like we have a master's degree, so that's not going anywhere. We can't change that. So there's student loans. So do we look at, is there a way to to have a student loan forgiveness program. I am not a legislator. I know nothing about the state of Connecticut and how anything works, but I do know that there were laws that were passed in the past, and there has been proposed legislation about loan forgiveness for teachers and loan forgiveness for educators to help get them and keep them in the state. So is that an opportunity, right? Our salaries, they are rising. I know, Jess, you are increasing salaries where you're at, where I was at Select. I mean, we were offering people what I was paying 10-year veterans to get into the position right away with high salary, and then having the compression effect where we had 10, 20-year veterans making close to $5,000 more than a new grad just because of that compression effect that happened. So how do we show that our salaries are raising, and how do we actually raise the salaries of people that are on year 10, 11, 12, 15, 16, because those are the ones we want to keep in our profession. So like I see that as a huge problem, right? Because that's kind of where that transition may happen for an individual when that kid turns 5 and they're like, what am I doing working second shift for $60K anymore? Like, I'm done, I'm out. And I think that's just the realistic what we're dealing with. That's the problem, what we're dealing with. And I love the idea, Henry, you're talking about getting kids into the profession is the number one thing, right? The kids are not naive, so they're Googling it. You do a quick Google search of athletic training salary in Connecticut right now, and it's going to come up $48,000 to $56,000. That's not going to do it. Like, so how do we change the narrative? Because that's like the most basic thing that a kid's looking at nowadays for their entry level positions like athletic training. So I think where I'm at, that's kind of like when I break it down to some of those things that can't be controlled. So how do we work around it with some of the things we can control? We can control salary to a certain extent. Again, to a certain extent, it's a little challenging. We can also very much control the positives we get back from work. So Jen, you talked about that energy exchange, that give and take. Can we work to educate our coaches and our athletic directors a little heavier on that energy exchange and how important it is to our profession, and how important, every season getting a little gear and having huge thank yous and having support at events and having, announcements and a proper athletic training room and a good supply budget, and how like little things that may seem little, like are not little to our profession. And that's how we function. So I know I just spit a lot out there too, and some of it kind of turns back to that solution side. But I just see that there's some clear non-negotiable things that are a secondary school athletic trainer, and we got to find a way to work around it.
I think some of those.
It is fascinating because you mentioned the starting salary, and that's kind of why I make the point about education, where I think teachers, it's the same thing for teachers. Your average teacher starting somewhere $48.50, so, and it takes them a long time to actually get to that. You got to get to that 10-year scale to say, now I see the value in being here and I'm being compensated for it.
Yeah. And we as a profession don't have that. So like having that scale is important. And that's something I know, Jess, you work with in the private sector. I was doing in Select, like having a career ladder, having a scheduled raises, and having a system set up to grow it and have a 10-year plan. But that really, there's not much to educate the kids on for that right now, because that's not in our profession.
I think
the teachers achieve that by unionizing.
That was that's on my paper here too. I have it written down, union question, because like I've never understood why we haven't brought that up more as a profession. But again, like I said, I'm young and naive, so I'll stop talking.
Well,
I know you all make very good points. These are all very great points. Go ahead, Jen, and then I'll
I was just going to say it kind of pairs along with what Andrew and you had said just about perceived value. If we could get our minds wrapped around the people in our stakeholder network, getting their heads wrapped around, we are second shift, which means we are now the nurse, the counselor, the athletic trainer. So now we're doing 3 jobs, and essentially, when everyone else leaves from the proper school day, the afternoon, a lot of that load will fall on that secondary school athletic trainer. Yeah. And you don't really know until you have that type of situation where you have to lean on that person. So I think coming back to, the education piece and being really connected with the school day staff, the nurses and counselors and things like that, your role kind of takes on some of that work, because those of you who've worked with high school athletes, you hear it all in your office, and a lot more focus on mental health and having mental health EAPs after school. So the burden and the liability is, I feel, is really high for our secondary school athletic trainers, because we're bearing a lot of that.
Well, I think it's one thing too to say the whole second shift work, because I do think there's a misconception of when we say second shift and when the public and stakeholders understand what we mean by second shift. Because when we say second shift, and a lot of stakeholders might say, well, you come into work at 2 o'clock and you work until 6 or 7. And I think that misconception ties into what you were just talking about, Jen, as far as connecting with the school staff. Like, our workday does not start at 2 o'clock. Our workday starts in the morning when we do all those things. And one of the common things we've talked about the past couple of years is that iceberg of athletic training. What the stakeholders see, what the public sees that we do, is 10% of our job. And the other 90% happens before that second shift time begins. I'm making doctor's appointments. I might be at doctor's appointments with kids so that parents and families understand what's going on, especially in our rural areas. Where you have to tie in more support. I have to have communication between my athletic director, my nurse, my school counselors, my teachers that understand what my kids are going through or what's going on, and giving that communication. So when we say second shift, it's that 10% of what you see of us out on the field or out at practice. The other 90% of what we're doing, showing up in the morning before each season starts and doing, we talked about emergency action planning, right? We're not only writing the emergency action plan to check the box that all of our schools are checking the box with what's done, but we're also doing the best practice and what's needed as far as the practices. So calling in EMS, calling in the fire department, calling in the police department, calling in our admins and our coaches, and going over the emergency action plans so that in that rare occasion that we're not on the field with everybody at a time, everybody knows what to do in those situations. So when a lot of sometimes perceived notion is, well, an athletic trainer, it's almost like a part-time job. It's always been 20 to 25 hours a week. You show up, you do your practices, you walk out the door. You've got an easy life. What are you talking about? But second shift to us are the hours that we like break apart our job. So the stuff that happens beforehand with all the admin side, to me is much more important sometimes than the 10% of what they see on the field, because I'm preventing something that might happening from occurring in that state of what's happening. So I think the iceberg needs to be talked about more with our stakeholders, and how do we, yes, legislation, what can we control, but that perceived value is becoming more and more important, because if we get these kids into these programs, but they're put with the preceptors who are working in an environment that they're not valued, they show up to do their job, they can't do their job. Me and Bob will laugh all the time, because I'll come in when I visit his school and I'll sit down on his couch and we'll be going back and forth. And he's like, you mean to tell me it's not like this everywhere? That you don't just like come in and sit on the couch and talk and we go through things? And I was like, you are the exception, my friend. So is it like that everywhere? No, but that's where we talk about the variance of consistency. So if you take a new grad and you throw them into a position where maybe they're not supported and valued and have all of those things, and they're in constant stress and increased liability, but they're not getting all of that, that's why some of these even good compensating jobs are not being filled right now, because of all those other soul-crushing things that a student might see that says, I don't want to be in this environment. I was with the athletic trainer that wasn't happy. So it becomes like, what came first, the chicken or the egg, right? Like, we get these kids in these programs, but if their perceived value of the profession is what it is right now, with the inconsistencies and all these puzzle pieces we're talking about, how do we get them to stay?
And yes, very good points, Jess. Thank you. And I think a lot of these things that we're talking about do translate to the collegiate setting. I think, we're very focused on the secondary school, which is great. And we definitely have a need there. We do have a need at the collegiate setting also. And many of these things that we're talking about, perceived value, the burnout, the amount of hours, all of those things, I think very much translate to that setting as well. So I just want to make sure that's my plug for our college ATs, to make sure we keep that also in perspective as we continue to talk about solutions, and so on and so forth.
Right, because I think what's important too, to touch on that, Eleni, is like we do have, universities that have the same issues. Like we just have Wesleyan actually lose an athletic trainer of theirs to go to a secondary school who had to figure it out. So they figured it out and they took somebody from Wesleyan to then go over there to say, okay, this is. So I do think it's really important that we don't forget about the collegiate setting, because if we do start creating solutions, we do want to take care of our secondary school, because we talk about it a lot because it tends to be our biggest clientele is the kids, right? That's the most, that we're going to have to take care of. But if we do start coming up with solutions that don't also take care of the collegiate setting, we'll start to have the same exact problem to a, bigger extent there. So we do have the issues across the state, which also talk about the same stuff, value, the support that they have from their administration. The difference now, we do have different varying models. It used to be that all athletic trainers were hired underneath the university and supported by the university. There is that varying model now where it's not always like that. So it's battling those things to make sure that consistency is there, so that a model doesn't come in and then the athletic trainer doesn't perceive it that they're getting their value, and then they either go to a different university, or a lot of them are leaving the states to go to other different universities, where the value and the consistency might be there. Same kind of conversations, the work-life balance, the compensation and stuff like that, but it is happening, and it's probably targeting those smaller schools that are already kind of slim with trying to make 2 athletic trainers at a
Right.
college cover all of their sports and all of their athletes. And then they end up with the same stuff with the burnout and all of that stuff, and have to hop universities as well.
Yeah. Jess, one of the things you pointed out a little bit earlier was the new graduate coming out too. I mean, athletic training is very unique among the healthcare professions, that it's really the only profession that I can think of that a new hire is going to be come out of college. And this is especially at the high school level, where the person is going to be by him or herself. There's really no support staff, and it can be really rough on somebody. I mean, this is an extreme case, but we had a wonderful graduate coming out of Southern a few years back. She got hired by a high school, working full time. She ended up being the athletic trainer for one of the state wrestling meets. She made a courageous call on taking somebody out with a concussion, and she ended up getting so verbally abused from the crowd that she was out of the profession within a few months, because the athletic director there, the other people there, nobody rose to support her and say this is wrong, and nobody even afterwards said to her she wasn't getting the support. And we hear that a lot from the high school people. You go there, you're going to be by yourself. So that has to be considered, that something has to be done to sort of provide sort of a group session type of thing, or try to get some support from the schools of what they're going to hire at, to make sure they make it through those first couple of years when they learn to sort of handle the ropes a little bit.
I'd love to be a part of that solution. That's kind of what I've done at my old position in our mentoring program. I think it's how you and your AD have a relationship, and I think, Bob, you're a testament to that, and the fact that you're saying you have a couch that your AT can come in and just have a conversation, right? That's the most important thing, because then that's a human to human conversation. So when you're scheduling a game on a Saturday at 5 because of a snow day, you may call Jess first and say, hey, I got to do this. You okay? All right, let's do it. That's what makes the relationship work. And I think teaching an athletic trainer that they have to see their athletic director as an equal and as someone they're working with, not someone they're always working for, because it has to be a mutual relationship, because our athletic director can't just see us as a coach. That doesn't healthcare, and they can just schedule around everything. And that's a problem I've seen in many different secondary schools.
Andrew, I think the other thing that we talk about creating more is not only the relationship with the athletic director, but relationship with the team physician. Every school, the football teams all have assigned team physicians, and some of them have a close relationship where the athletic trainer can call and check in, even if it's not football, right? It could be any sport, but they can check in with us on that. And I think we can work on creating a tighter relationship there with each school, and with not the school doc, but the team doc, for the athletic trainer support.
I think that's also in some areas, where our stakeholders don't understand how important the relationship between the physician and the athletic trainer is, and how much support is given between each other. And that's where that consistency comes in, where some athletic trainers are able to create the relationship with a team physician of their choosing who does support an athletic trainer, understand who an athletic trainer is, understand their scope of practice, and be there as a value, somebody who sees their value and supports them. But there are some schools that it's very difficult to do that too, where they choose a state, a board of ed physician who is either primary care, or somebody who oversees the nursing staff, who they then say has to oversee the athletic trainer, but does not have a relationship with the athletic trainer, creating a little bit of a difficulty of a situation. So again, just that education piece of how important that physician relationship is. And then if a school is going to state who a physician needs to be, that they understand that scope of practice and relationship of what it needs to be. Because I don't know what I would do if I didn't get to text my team doctor on the weekly messages of going back and forth just to support clinical decisions and what we're doing, not just because it's in our scope to do so, and required of us, but just the relationship does take some of that burden off of us when I can call you and be like, hey, this is what I'm doing. Does this sound like this is what I should be doing, in a differential diagnosis situation?
I know some of you have already said it, but I can't reiterate. Like, it's like I tell Jess and my other athletic trainers, it's like we're in a foxhole together, right? We're gonna be the last ones there at night. When crap hits the fan, we're gonna be in the middle of it, and we're the ones standing next to each other on sidelines and games of that nature. And I think it's important that you support your athletic trainer. They're part of the team, especially when you get those new folks that are coming into your building and introducing the coaches, and coaches get to know them. And right outside of being a coach and an athletic trainer, we're moms, we're dads, we're humans. So it's like getting to know who they are. And, you're going to have tough conversations, with the coaches, and the coaches are going to, they will push back too, because they all want, but bottom line is we all want what's best for the kids. Right. And, in building that relationship. And, our athletic trainer, Jess, we, took out the starting quarterback in the middle of the state playoffs. Coach did not blink an eye. He said, okay. And we moved right on. And that's just the trust and relationship, just being around people. And I know our athletic trainers and Jess have, done a great job. Is they'll educate our coaches too. This is what I'm seeing. This is why I'm doing this decision. They're not justifying themselves. They know what they're doing is right, but they're just also educating, because I'll ask a million questions a lot of times to them, and it's just because I want to know. So, and I always tell my ATs, like, you're the final say, and what you say goes. So it's just about supporting them.
Yeah, and I think that shows the differences between a situation that, Bobby's referring to when I stepped in at Maloney before I could hire somebody. I stepped in with that notion that he was talking about, that they were going to allow me to go into the Board of Ed and educate them on the perceived value of the athletic trainer, on why things needed to change, on all of the barriers that we're talking about that I'm going to try to face when I'm there and try to hire someone, but I can't hire someone and put them there until we talk about these barriers and you promise to, do this with me. And my Christmas gift came to me that day, where he did. So, and they have. And I've seen a Board of Ed, and they had a great athletic trainer for 20 years who now works for us too. We pulled him back in to try to go against those barriers. But it leads to situations like that, right? Those are situations we're trying to avoid. The situations that the Southern grad faced at a wrestling tournament when she tried to make a decision and wasn't supported in those moments and had to face that, so that she lost that profession. She left the profession all in general. When I walked into a locker room and I took one look at that kiddo, and he didn't take a crazy hit. There wasn't a play where he went down. There wasn't anything noticed. But I walked in and I took a look at his eyes and I said, he doesn't look like himself. So I walked right over to him and I said, are you okay? And we had the trust of the relationship for him to look at me and say, I don't know. And so I did what I had to do in those, few seconds to make those split time decisions of, okay, we are addressing a head injury. I walked straight outside. I think we were tied or down by 3, and it's halftime of a semifinal state tournament game. And I walked right into 7 coaches who were very intently talking about their game plan. And I said, I got to pull him. No questions asked. They looked right at me and they said, okay. Now our next guy going in was a sophomore that has never played a down in his life in a varsity football game. But I was prepared as an athletic trainer. We talk about those moments and you're preparing for the suck, right? Like you're preparing for like coaches to swear and yell at you and say all the things because you're in the heat of a stressful moment, right? Not because they don't like you or anything like that. But I got a simple okay. And then I walked into the locker room and I was met with a dad who came running in, and Bobby stood right behind me so that he could prepare for if I was to get yelled at to step in. And dad just said, thank you. And we walked over to the sidelines. I was with my team doctor and he said, where is this kid? What are we doing? What's going on? And so I explained it to him and he said, wow, that's the value of having an athletic trainer that's valued and supported and trusted and who's able to do their job and who gets to know these kids to walk into a locker room and say, this kid's not okay. This is the decision I need to make, and that I had the freedom to make it. But as you can see, that's not the norm sometimes. And it's a very difficult position to take. And when you take a new grad and you put them into a situation where either they're in a situation where they have to make a decision and they're not supported and they're going to put their hands up and say, if I can't do my job, I'm not going to do my job. Or you have a student next to them who's witnessing them not being able to do their job, them frustrated, them walking out to the hallway and crying because everything in my being tells me I need to stand up for this kid and I'm not being able to do so or supported. That's a huge double-edged sword where you're losing the athletic trainer that's there, but you're also losing the student, because why is a student going to enter into a secondary school in Connecticut if that's what they're witnessing?
And I think those are issues that we globally see in athletic training too, for sure. And I think reporting structure is something that we talk about oftentimes, with NATA and kind of globally with athletic training, making sure that, that athletic trainer has a direct communication with their physician, because, that's our scope of practice and that's what we should be doing, but also hiring an organizational structure about who the athletic trainer is reporting to. Like all those things play a very important role in the perceived value, being a healthcare provider, but also then kind of who that athletic trainer is reporting to or who their perceived boss is, I think are also very important things that kind of we're all talking about. So I think we're hearing, so we're going to try to group this into themes now. Ready? So education, not just of education of the value of the athletic trainer, but also education on the need for the athletic trainers to all the stakeholders. So I think this is stakeholder education is the value, the perceived value, and the need to have somebody there. And also education on kind of the structure that surrounds having an athletic trainer, who they should be communicating with, how communication should be going to them, those practice changes, all those things. And then the support of the athletic trainer, they're the healthcare provider. They are going to tell, they're going to make the decision based on play, et cetera. And their number one priority is the health and safety of the athlete. Then we kind of have the education of the students, and then the people we want to be coming in, right? The educating people on what athletic training is and why they should be coming to our universities in the state of Connecticut, right? The 4 universities that we have. So I feel like as an educator now, who was a clinician for a very long time, I think reaching students before they even start to make decisions about where they're going to college, but also then in undergrad, and just being able to, I'm going to use the word recruit or educate. I feel like right now I could use them both, right? Recruiting them, but also educating them on, this is what an athletic trainer is. This is what an athletic trainer does. These are the schools that we have in the state of Connecticut. So kind of touching those high school students, even in the state, early on, to educate them on, what athletic training is, the education, the process, et cetera, I think is important. And what are the other things we talked about? Communication, perceived, a lot of it, I feel like falls in the buckets of education, which will then in turn help with the burnout, the communication, the stress. And then I think our other issue, I don't like using the word issue, but our other, I'm going to call it an opportunity, our other opportunity to help keep students in the state or attract people to the state, I think are also things that we need to talk about when we talk about solutions to filling, like the imminent need to fill positions, but also to keep our grads here. So what types of opportunities do we see or can we think about when we think about how do we get people here? And then how do we get people to stay here? Like what are some opportunities we see there?
Lenny, I'd like to add one more concern to the list of ones you gave.
Yep.
One is the student debt and the cost
Oh,
of an
right.
education.
Sorry.
I think also the cost to maintain our certification.
Exactly. I
I
mean,
think
it's
that
cost, what are we, $600 a year, whether you practice or not, between licensing fees, certification fees,
And NATA.
and NATA membership fees.
Mhm.
So
And
there's
then-
definitely a cost there, but some interesting numbers while doing some research ahead for this. The average graduate athletic training that came from a master's program's debt. This is a national number from a research study back in 2004. I'm sorry, no, 2022. I'm sorry.
It's like
80
2004.
No, the person did a study range of
When I was
2004 to
graduating.
2022, but the study came out in 2023, 2024. The average debt for a graduate student, which would be the more recent ones, $86,184. With the highest going to private schools, and what's even worse, the highest on minority populations. They have to take up the greatest debt. The typical standard is that you do not want, the federal government feels you should not have debt greater than 100% of your annual income. Athletic trainers are somewhere around 130%. The monthly rate is not supposed to be more than 10 to 15% of your payments should not be more than 10 to 15% of your monthly income. The average athletic trainer is up to 19% of their average income. These are national numbers.
And I think those are the biggest numbers why we don't have students in our profession right now.
Yeah. Ironically, and this is one of the things, I mean, Henry brought up the idea of recruiting. I know we did a lot of recruiting at Southern. Literally, I emailed every person who applied to Southern Connecticut for athletic training. I texted every one of them as well, and I even called many of them. The problem we're running into, as Jen pointed out earlier, is they look at athletic training as a stepping stone usually off to PT. PT is right now one of the most popular professions most of the students coming in want to go into. Ironically, their debt is not 137%, their debt is around 190%. So financially, athletic training might be the better way to go. But those are the numbers that the students are facing as they come out, in addition to the money they just got to pay to get their CEUs. They got to be member of the NATA, the CATA, EATA. They got to pay their certification dues, which is separate from national dues. Plus, they got to pay the state of Connecticut. What are we at, 300 now?
205.
205. NATA is 300. So all of a sudden, you're paying $600, and if you're going to get CEUs, you're paying that on top of it as well. So financial is a big aspect as well.
Yeah, I think so. So, okay. So student debt cost, and I'm going to lump that into cost of maintaining certification, the licensure, and all that, and then kind of keep student loan as a different kind of bucket. We'll call them buckets. So we have the education of stakeholders bucket. We have the education to recruit bucket. And then we have the student debt and then cost to maintain certification. And I mean, I feel like the education to recruit bucket goes along with bringing students into our programs. And then I think our last bucket is retention. So retaining not only our students that are graduating, but retaining athletic trainers that we currently have in the state and bringing in more professionals, not just students. Someone's texting me. There's another theme that we kind of talked about was like that mentoring and support structure. And I think that can go into that bucket of educating the stakeholders, having that mentorship, having that support from those people.
I'm curious, Bob and Jessica, seems like you guys have a really great working relationship, and that's kind of like a gold standard of what we all strive to accomplish as athletic trainers. Has there ever been, and there may have already been, talks about intra-professional like collaborations? I know there was just a big athletic director conference. Do they ever consider or talk about like establishing rapport with your athletic trainer, or how to get the most out of your relationship with your athletic trainer, or something along those lines? I don't know if that's an opportunity to consider, from the AD perspective, to how maybe we can work collaboratively to have a lights out working relationship like you guys have.
Yeah, I know at the CAD level, the Connecticut Athletic Association, they have stressed it at our state meetings. I didn't go to the national the last 2 years, but at the state meetings, Fred Balsamo and the panel, they will talk about the importance of the athletic trainers. They'll talk about the concerns going on throughout the state, and their support to try to retain and get more so they can. But also, just how we treat, like, right, they're one of us. Like, you guys are one of us. Like, it's a team effort. So I think that message has always been given to the athletic directors. I never come across any athletic director in my experience where I felt like they thought differently of athletic trainers or anyone of that nature. So that's why I always said to Jess, I'm like, really? I'm like, this doesn't happen, because the people I speak to, that I talk to, that are very close with, they have very strong relationships with their athletic trainers. So that's why. But at the CAD level, it's always, and they're always there and willing to support, when it comes to, finding more athletic trainers.
Is there any education at that CAD level on how athletic directors can educate up their chain of command to, business directors, directors of finance, boards of education on the need
Advocate,
to hire
yeah.
their own, or to have funding to sufficiently hire an athletic trainer? Because we see, or I've seen in my past, I could have Bob, you could be the best in the world, right? And you get it and you understand it. But that miscommunication usually is 1 or 2 steps above that athletic director, either to, a superintendent, assistant superintendent, or like a business director, or then that board of ed. So is there education for them on how to handle those conversations and how to, talk financial numbers and risk and litigation and, issues with, student athlete health and safety? Like, I just wonder, I think that's more the issue.
Yeah, I think in regards to my situation, Jess educated me a lot on, because this where I was in the old structure, right? Our district was in the old structure where you're paying a small fraction, but now you're getting this major number. And I remember Jess before we went through that, the company that she was with, she's like, it is changing, and this is what's going on. And she was just, again, it just understanding the landscape, what's going on. And at the CAD level, they have discussed, at the state meetings where, I recall the conversations like where the costs were going up because they were talking about shortages and, so where the prices are changing. And again, I know every district's in a different financial standpoint and physical structure and what they can and can't do. But yeah, it's in regards to the steps and like what the different kind of programs, I don't recall, but I know there is stuff that have been said about it, but in terms of like educational material. But I know Jess, I'll reach out to Jess and say, hey, I have an AD at an AD, for our league meeting. And she'll just say, hey, have him call me and I'll educate him or her, and that's what she'll do. And I'll get the information. So it's finding, I guess, those liaisons, like, right, Jess is, obviously I work closely with her, but she's just sending out stuff to other schools who she's not even associated with, but her whole main goal is to help kids and make sure kids are protected, right? That's your goal. So she doesn't care she doesn't need the contract. She doesn't care if she gets a contract. It's just helping people and educating people on what to do.
So maybe if we could find a way within this group to formalize that process, because I think that's a very important process. I mean, I have had many ADs, including what Jen has spoke about earlier, reach out saying, how do we do this? What do I do? Like, I need an athletic trainer. Like, how do I tell my board of ed that this is not a green light scenario. This is red light, urgent, everything's flashing. I need an AD. So I think, how do we maybe find a way to help those ADs in those scenarios? Because I think that would create structured beneficial positions for those ATs.
And I
think
think,
Oh.
sorry, that's
Of
okay. I think these are amazing conversations, and I know CATA is also having these types of conversations. Like, how do we get to, you know, communicating with the ADs, communicating with the CIAC, so then that information can kind of then be disseminated to the boards of ed, the districts, et cetera. I know, like, right now it's budget season for many boards of ed, and budgets are very tight for a number of reasons, and in a number of line items that are in those big budget packets that come out that the boards of ed review. So, and I think I may have cut you off, Bob, because you're probably going to go ahead and start talking about what I'm going to ask you. But, you know, I mentioned KSI in the beginning of our meeting. They have data, you know, that can help support, you know, the CATA, or, you know, helping the athletic trainers of certain school districts, or, you know, of the companies, kind of bring some of this data to show, you know, this is really why we need to budget for these athletic trainers to be here. You know, and Jess is here as the CATA president. So I think this is a great venue to even talk about, you know, how can we best get that information to those places to help disseminate that information. And, you know, having you and Henry here, I think, is a great place to start this conversation. And then how can we then bring that into what our goal here is as the task force? Like, what can we do with this task force to help kind of get that ball really rolling, as we see this need has increased so much that we need to have a task force? That was like 17 questions, but, you know.
I definitely think in regards to is the two different models, right? You see, you know, some are here through the Board of Ed, some are here through a company, and just giving models to athletic directors so they understand the process. You know, I'm in a big league. I'm in the CCC, so we have a lot of schools. We have 30 schools, and it's not often, maybe twice a year, we'll have an AD ask how many of their athletic trainers are through the board, and how many are through the company, you know, hired through the company. So I think it's just, you know, that, you know, is just explaining two models and how those look, and how do you go about presenting, and having those conversations with the higher ups, you know. And I know Jen, you know, we still circle back to the same issue. And I know Henry touched on it too. It's like, it's all great, but where are the people, right? If every district had, you know, let's say we could fund everybody, but there's just not enough athletic trainers. And that's the issue right now, right? Is how do we promote, how do we get more people in the doors in the schools to, you know, to go after those professions?
Well, do we have to have 10 open positions that are high coveted and high value to weed out some of those school districts or colleges, small colleges, that are still trying to pay $40,000, $45,000 for athletic trainers? Because I don't know, like, what do you have to do first? Do you have to have the nice positions, like you say, Bob? But do you have to have everybody funded to have a full-time athletic trainer at, you know, $80,000? Or do we have to, like, how do you get those kids into school? Because I don't see them coming to the profession where we're currently standing.
I think some of this stuff needs to work in tandem, right? And please, everybody else chime in. But we can't first try to recruit the students and bring them in, and then try to educate and do X, Y, Z. Like, they've got to be going on at the same time. And I think we can work as a team and figure out kind of how to do that. Like, the CATA has, you know, they're planning, and they have a strategic plan on, you know, how to do some of these things and how to help. And just, you know, feel free to chime in. But I think, you know, that education portion has to also start at the same time, because I think it was Jess who said the chicken or the egg, which comes first. But these processes have to be going on at the same time with, you know, as a team, we're kind of working on certain areas of that. But we bring in the students, they graduate, we have to be able to keep them here. And if we wait for that period to come where they have now gone through the 2 years and now they're graduating, to then educate and try to fix the mentoring and all the other buckets that we've talked about, then we've kind of shot ourselves in the foot because we can't keep them here. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So I think it does need to work in tandem, but again, that's my opinion.
We have a major network here in Connecticut with ESPN, who is outreach galore. And I'm just wondering if there is a way that, because they cover so many of our college sports and regular sports, if there's a way to develop a relationship with them and their broadcasters so that they speak to the value of athletic trainers just in their daily, talking about a game. The athletic trainer's out on the field and saved this guy's leg, or the athletic trainer worked with nutrition on this person. Whatever it is, to just teach them to speak about the value of the athletic trainer in their daily stuff, because they are a huge resource for communication and marketing and sport-related issues.
I know
Yeah.
the NBA pushed that initiative a few years ago, specifically in the NFL, with their broadcast crews to associate with athletic trainers and not trainers, and speak to the medical staff as athletic training staff. But I do see that as a value, 100%.
And I think what Eleni was touching on too, as far as that education process and everything happening in tandem, is how do we best all these things that we're talking about, right? So we're talking about them. We talk about me and Bobby McKee having a great relationship and having a great thing at one school. We talk about one bad instance that happens at one school, but how do we at the large level bring the conversation to then show the students and show the athletic trainers of Connecticut and show athletic trainers in other states what we're doing here to make promises to each other, to collaborate as stakeholders, to address the barriers that are happening, be honest about relationships that have either happened in the past or where they have been, but where we want to take them and how we want to collaborate together to fix those barriers as best as we can. I always tell my athletes, control what you can, right? There's things that we can't control, but what can we control? And when we continue to bring up this perceived value, that's something that we can control as stakeholders, as what our messaging is across the board. We know that we have great relationships with some athletic directors, with administrations, with board of eds, with some physicians, but how do we highlight those so that becomes the bigger message, so that the students might be in one scenario where an athletic trainer has a bad day, where something happens and they have to handle a stressful situation. However, it's not the only message that they see. At the top of it, they see the CATA, the CIAC, the NEPSAC, CSMS all coming together, whether it's on the big screen of ESPN or the small screen, or just messaging together, sitting together and saying, this is important, this is valued, we have to come together and deliver these messages at important venues and spaces and be intentional about it. Like, I feel like those are the things that we can control, and those are the things that we can show that picture out. So when an athletic trainer is at EATA or they're at NATA and they say, I saw on your social media the CATA, the CIAC, NEPSAC, physicians, whatever it was, or the task force come together, that's really cool. That's a perceived value thing that then gets trickled down, because if an athletic trainer has a bad instance where, last year it was the Lightning games, right? Those were some of the biggest messes we had across the state, was who makes the call? Is the person being supported? What's going on? That's a stressful scenario, right? But those become the smaller little things, and the bigger things become, but we're really valued and supported. So if we have one hiccup, it's one hiccup. It's not the story.
And that's a lot of the chatter that comes back to the classroom. It's because a lot of our schools, because we're in Connecticut, our clinical sites, especially in the first years of our programs, are at sites in Connecticut. So the Lightning thing, I mean, it was chatter every day. What happened at the school? Who said what? Who did this? So I think, it's a trickle down effect. And I didn't want to cut you off, Jess. If I did, I apologize. But I think also a lot of the things you're talking about will also help not just bring in students and retain students, but we've had a lot of athletic trainers leave the state of Connecticut. I'm sure we could gather that data somehow, leave the state of Connecticut, and it would be great to bring them back to say, hey, look at what we've done collaboratively. Look at, the state wants to help, we're all working together. We have these solutions that we've come into play, come back home, come back to Connecticut, sort of thing. So I think it's important that we think about bringing professionals into, not just that student piece.
Because I think like fireworks go off when you say that, because like we take an instance, right, like Jesse Wiley, who was at Maloney for 20 years, and then it got too difficult and he left. Man, everybody knows I'm stubborn and I really love a good competition of proving something. So I said to Jesse, I'm gonna get you back. He left the profession altogether, and I said, tell me what I gotta do. Let's talk about the barriers of what I need to do to get you back. And we talked about them. They're all the same things that we're talking about here. Biggest thing for him was his work-life balance. That was his number one priority. I changed his position. I gave him more flexibility. He's now probably my number one worker at this moment in time, right? We've lost some athletic trainers over my career, a lot of my colleagues. So I'm in that 10 to 15 year range that we're talking about of losing athletic trainers altogether, the profession, because we have young families and all of that. We've lost a lot of my colleagues to states like Texas, and one of the biggest reasons that you'll hear from athletic trainers that have gone to Texas and are happy was the perceived value. They went to Texas and they were wined and dined, and was their number one fan. Physicians lined up at their door to take them out to dinner. They are like everything because obviously Texas sports, right? And Texas football. So the perceived value was the athletic trainer was number one. So we've lost a lot to that. So when you're a student and you're hearing stories of like that are connected to Connecticut, that are going to states like a Texas or other states that have been, when we'll talk about solutions, have done solutions, and they're saying, oh, they're passing legislation, I'm going there, right? Like that's perceived value. That's where I'm going to go. How do we get them not to do that? Because those are the stories that the students are hearing on top of going to their clinical sites of athletic trainers that are dealing with all the barriers that they're dealing with.
Okay.
I think it's a perfect time to kind of pivot because you brought up solutions to kind of the solutions. And I know Gary and I have a list. So Gary, you go.
Yeah. A lot of the stuff obviously is going to take over time. It's going to create almost like a culture change. But one of the things that we're supposed to give to the Public Health Committee are possible solutions that the state can do possibly in a bill this year. And because of timing, they actually need a lot of the stuff by next Friday. Yes.
All right. Let's go.
Some of the things that Lenny and I have been looking at, because we did some groundwork ahead of time, certain states have done certain things to help athletic trainers. For instance, Delaware has created a $2 million block grant, which provides like an incentive to many high schools to sort of add on to the athletic trainer salary to make it more attractive. Louisiana has done, actually Alabama has done something similar, but they also have student loan programs to help reduce. And Louisiana has done the same thing. Louisiana will give a $6,000 a year payment to graduates if they went to a Louisiana school, and they give up to $30,000 over 5 years to help reduce student loan costs. Connecticut has done something similar, but not for athletic training. They did it for undergraduate programs, that if you go to a Connecticut school, they will do student loan reimbursement. However, that is limited, first come, first serve. It is not focused on athletic training. And I don't think it applies to, it doesn't apply to athletic training specifically. It does cover allied health professionals if they're coming from out of state. There's also a program in Connecticut as well. It's called the Connecticut Health Horizons Program. They're actually providing a lot of funding for nursing and social work issues, which maybe we can start doing it. One of the things that they offer is a $10,000 tuition assistance for students attending certain state colleges in Connecticut for nursing or social work. So right now we're sort of looking for the low-hanging type of stuff that we can get in, and then we can continue the conversation later for what can be done to maybe help the environmental issues that obviously are one of the biggest problems of all. Any thoughts?
In residency programs, the loan forgiveness program looks a little different, where you have to basically give back a certain number of years to your community if you're training there. So 5 years of residency, you have to give back 5 years to the community.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, so I'm hearing, just to make the list here, like some sort of loan forgiveness, some sort of aid or scholarship aid. And then
Could there be
the,
funding to help create some of those education things we talked about, like
yep.
the
So I
AD
would,
up, and then funding to help create like high school workshops? I think maybe with the CIAC, they bring in kids, teach them about
Yep.
athletic training. Like that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit, I think.
yep. So funding for education, that's here. And then I think our licensure fees, I know there's a couple professions that were able to decrease their licensure fees when they were faced with some of the similar issues. So that's something that we wanted to bring to the group and gather thoughts on. And then I think even, you know, as we continue this, we do need to have something in writing, but we can continue the conversation through the legislative session. And we hope that everybody will continue to join us for these conversations as we continue to navigate this. But also thinking of, you know, funding pathways for the schools that don't have the funding, who won't have the budget, you know, those types of funding opportunities to help put athletic trainers in schools, and then maybe even, you know, funding pathways for multiple athletic trainers that are in those larger schools that will then help offset some of those things that we talked about, burnout, et cetera, mentorship, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I
Eric,
think
I'm blanking on the bill I saw that was proposed and it did not get passed, but it was towards the structure of it was it had a minimum salary of $60,000 for educators in the state, and it had a fund that allowed districts to pull money out of that fund to pay teachers if needed. So I just wonder if there's a structure similar to that could be utilized for athletic
Like what
training.
they were doing for the educators.
Yeah, right. Creates
Yeah, we
that
can look into
minimum
that.
threshold, and then has a fund that allows a district that maybe doesn't have the money to pull from it. Whereas, you know, Glastonbury has proven that they're able to pay for it, so they don't have the need to.
Well, I think
Right.
Alabama did something similar as far as having the structure. So they put like, I think it was, they capped it off at, I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, but it might be $2 million as far as the fund that was able to be pulled from. But Alabama put it into an entire equation so that it fed schools that were in more underserved populations. That each school was able to get that there was a maximum of, I want to say, $7,500 a year to give towards that athletic trainer for their salary. But it went into, you know, and I think in Connecticut we would use things like the schools that get, you know, whether it's the free lunch programs and stuff like that, that those are the schools that are going to get more funding to pull from. So that they can get that little extra cushion to kind of incentivize an athletic trainer to come there.
And Jess, I know the NATA was going to send us some like summary information of what other states have done. Do we know, did they send that yet? Or do we know?
So they directed us towards Louisiana.
Okay.
We're talking about Alabama. And Alabama has the structure of how they pulled up that equation of
Okay.
how it's allotted.
Okay.
And pulled from different healthcare situations across the nation of healthcare in general. So a
Mhm.
lot of what we talked about as far as student loan reimbursement, the only other things that we haven't talked about that they hit on more so with like nursing and healthcare professions that happen after normal hours would be way more difficult to do. But it was things like childcare tax credits and stuff like that. So when we talk about the working family and how a lot of athletic trainers can't, you know, once they have kids, feel like they can't be an athletic trainer because either the schedule, but also blatantly the childcare cost. So that there have been some states that, in general, have done healthcare child tax to help working families.
Okay.
Just for reference, that bill I was looking at was at Senate Bill 381.
From last year.
Yeah, that was the educators' $60,000 minimum salary with state kind of subsidiaries to help Board of Eds pay for those minimum salaries. And it may have structure to it already, which is something that we may not have time to make our own structure if we have to provide a lot of information by Friday.
The only other
I
thing
think
that comes to
we can-
mind that might be way outfield, just a thing to think about as we bring up things like ESPN, is just to think about coming up with some creative solutions, like a correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure Hawaii, all their athletic trainers are pretty much government employees, and they take a lot of that money from the PGA Tour that comes to Hawaii, is then taken and put into a fund for them to use for athletic trainers. Now, we don't have as pretty of a vast land as Hawaii to draw people in, but that's just another creative solution as far as like funding goes. If there's anything state
They've done a
legislation.
really good job retaining there too.
Yeah, I mean, when you're a government employee, some of these pieces get taken care of, but we don't have that. But do we have something in the state of Connecticut where we can pull funding from to promise to athletic training? Retaining.
Jeff, you brought up Hawaii. They have another requirement there, which I'm not sure if I want to go into state mandates, but Hawaii also mandates 2 athletic trainers in any high school above a certain number, where obviously life balance is a big issue. I don't think we can mandate anything, but can we put a recommendation that they're based on student athletic population? Maybe there should be this many people there, so people can have a weekend off or a day off or somebody to talk to if things go bad.
But I think that's important just based on health and safety, right? Like if I'm going to just use, if I have 10 kids I'm taking care of, it's much easier for one person to take care of 10 kids. And I'm just using numbers that I can add up quickly in my head versus me taking care of 100 kids at one time. So I think, having multiple athletic trainers, yes, there's obviously more of a cost associated, but the more important thing is the health and safety and making sure we're providing coverage where coverage needs to be provided, not saying, okay, we're going to go here today because it's the highest risk of injury, right? But I actually can't go there, even though their risk is high. It's just not as high as this one because I don't have enough people here to do that. I think, it's very important that we maintain our goal of the health and safety is our number one priority. And all of these things can help us maintain those. So if there's something that other states are doing, I think Texas also has 2 in most of their schools, I think. But
has the language changed at all? It's been a little while since I've seen the CIAC like handbook, but I know it used to be that athletic trainers are recommended. Has the language changed to required, or is it still recommended? Because if we're not even requiring one, how can we go ahead and recommend 2?
Right. Yeah, it's still recommended.
Yeah. I spoke at a high school this past year who wanted to bring in healthcare providers. They don't have an athletic trainer at their high school, but they wanted to bring one in to talk about the importance of athletic trainers. So there's definitely a disconnect.
Sarah?
Hi. So I just, I know I've been quiet this whole meeting, but I guess as a former athletic trainer, I might have something to offer. So I left in 2014, and I honestly can say I haven't looked back, no regrets. But it's just to caution you, I know we've talked about this, like having multiple ATs at the larger school. I would be careful about that. The smaller schools are busy too. So my first job was at Derby High School. It's a tiny school, but in the winter between wrestling and basketball, 4 nights, like 3 nights during the week and 1 weekend night. And, when I left, I didn't have a family. Like I was married, but we didn't have kids. And now I have a 2.5-year-old. And I'll be honest, I don't know that there's a financial number that you could give me that would make me give up bedtime with my child 4 nights a week. Like those toddler snuggles are precious. And I wouldn't, I don't think I would give that up for any financial number. So I think, don't discount the smaller schools as like, oh, there's not a lot of kids here, they don't need a second staff person. Like you're asking that one person to probably still work 3 or 4 nights a week. And, one of those is usually a weekend, all day wrestling, big match tournament thing. So it's hard.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's very much based on, the types of sports, like you were saying, like you had, the wrestling and the all day tournaments, or you have ice hockey with wrestling. Like there's a lot going on. And basketball runs the whole gamut of the afternoon until 9 p.m. And even in our collegiate settings, making sure that our colleges are well staffed enough. So then, you don't have an athletic trainer covering 3 seasons in a row you know, and they're traveling the entire year, you know, so I think, you know, fair point, big school, small school, making sure there's enough staff there to help each other, I think is very important. And we can use equations, you know, from the NATA that they have out, and we could plug those numbers in. I mean, we used to do it on paper and pencil, I remember when I was in grad school, but now we could just kind of plug them in and even, you know, come up with some solutions that way to see, based on the sports, how many technically should be there, you know, sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think something we talked about last year at the CATA, and trying to hand recommendations off as far as our high schools went, was exactly what you're talking about. Not only the number of athletes at a competition, but how many things were going on simultaneously at the same time. Because we are seeing things like, you know, we had an athletic trainer in the fall travel for football, to be on the football sidelines, but then have soccer going on at the same time. And unfortunately, the soccer tournament, at the soccer game, somebody had an incident where it was kind of one of those crazy ones where teeth ended up inside someone's head. And the child, one of them, they had to call 2 ambulances to the scene. One of them was having a seizure from the concussion, and the other one was, you know, unconscious. So we have those things happening simultaneously to what you're talking about. So I think coming up with, just like what you're saying, Eleni, is the recommendations for consistency of care across number of athletes, and, you know, number of competitions at the same time that somebody's in charge of, and making sure those things come in balance.
Is anyone aware of the steps that Massachusetts took to make a requirement for athletic trainers at football games? And Henry, you may be able to speak to that, because I think that came from the MIAA, that they have a requirement similar to, I believe some school districts have requirements of having, you know, an ambulance and an athletic trainer on site. I think that came from MIAA. So I wonder, maybe another point to that too, Henry, like what would the steps for us be to maybe change that wording, like Jen said, from recommend to require for collision sports or for contact sports? Because I think, and again, that's a question that you're probably like, I can't answer that one. But
no,
like,
I mean, I think it makes sense, because obviously for the collision sports, I mean, you're right. I mean, everyone, of course, makes it a point to have your, you know, your trainer, your doctor, your ambulance, because, you know, it can go wrong. The issue, of course, comes in with your sub-varsity sports in some levels where, is it realistic with everything that we're talking about here? We would have games not played in certain sports. That's just the reality of the situation. It would, you know, where if you required a trainer to be at a JV baseball game or something like that, or a freshman baseball game, we'd be in trouble. Schools wouldn't be able to play those games.
Yeah, what if that requirement was just that the school was to have an athletic trainer that is their specific athletic trainer?
Yeah,
that is a little, what you're saying, 100%. That can't happen.
yeah. Because I think that's exactly what I think the situation Jess just described is what schools do. So they'll have like 3 or 4 games going on, maybe on their site, maybe not on their site, but unfortunately they're asking this one person to cover all the games. Which what Jess just described is the obstacle that they're facing.
But there are
we were
still
involved
schools that
the
have no athletic trainers.
I'm with Jen. I think the obstacle is bigger than that. I think I'm managing 780 athletes myself at Glastonbury.
Mm-hmm.
It is doable. It is not ideal. Our profession is going to burn out at that rate. But I see the bigger issue is the 500 athletes at school X, the 280 athletes at school Y that don't have anybody, that go see their nurse and they check out at 2:30, and then it's good luck, and they come on to Glastonbury for an indoor track meet, and they line up.
And you're stuck with all the athletes.
I agree. Yeah,
I can't tell you what happens and what a big pain point some of my athletic trainers have.
So I see
when 25 Waterbury school athletes show up at a basketball game, and it is not in our scope of practice to evaluate and assess those 25 athletes who are not under our care because they do not have access to health care.
Yeah,
So
the language in the handbook is written that way because there's a shortage. So if you make a requirement for an athletic trainer to be there and there's no athletic trainers, then the sport gets canceled. And that's why it was languaged that way. And, you know, if you legislate, then you have no choice. You'll have to cancel the games across that way. So I don't disagree. Every school should have it. So it should certainly be a recommendation from this task force. But we just have to be a little careful about how we legislate around something like that, because there's a huge trickle-down effect with legislation around how many numbers of people have to be available. And I don't disagree, because it's a safety issue. But we just have to be careful, because if there's no humans to actually fill the position, then what do we
Yes,
do?
maybe could you reach out to some individuals at Adam and see what that legislation looked like in the past few years in terms of their high school football athletic training coverage? Because I have a few individuals I know, and I can reach out to some athletic directors I know in Mass that were pretty much told by the MIAA, we will cancel your games unless you have an athletic trainer on site.
Yeah,
So
so I think it
I
becomes
see that as like, we don't want to cancel games, but we would cancel if we didn't have officials.
I think, and we can definitely gather that information. And I know the NATA has a whole new structure to help support state GACs, which is really great, our legislative affairs committees. So Jess, I'm sure we could maybe reach out and find out, you know, a summary of what was going on. And I'm sure, you know, we have some foundations here in Connecticut that might be able to help us with some of that information also. But in the essence of time, because I think we need to wrap up at 2, and, you know, going back to Dr. Arliss Mayer's, you know, kind of point, like, yes, the health and safety is important. I think, you know, we have recommendations. The CIAC has recommendations now. So let's, you know, go back to the cart and see what can we do to kind of get those bodies here and keep those bodies here. So then we could start to fill those and start to address even then higher level issues. And I mean, these conversations have been great. And I do hope that we can kind of pull us all back together again. So Peter, are you still here? Because I have a question.
I'm still here, yeah.
Okay, you didn't have to turn us
No,
off
don't
yet.
Didn't want to do that.
Do we schedule another, like, what's the process here? Should we schedule another meeting now altogether? Gary and I can write something up and get it out to the group. Like, what's the process here, so that kind of all of us can understand what that process is?
So for scheduling another meeting in the future, it's really up to you, the 2 co-chairs. So you and Gary, you guys would like meet and you guys would decide on the date. And
Okay,
that's it, basically, yeah.
okay. All right. So I think the solutions that we talked about to kind of start with and then be able to grow with were the addressing the cost to maintain the certification, so the licensure, the student debt, oh my gosh, the student debt, any possible funding for education, education of stakeholders and education at, you know, the high school level to recruit. And then scholarship type funding, kind of similar to what Alabama did. And then I already said did I say student loan forgiveness? Yeah, student debt, similar to kind of what Louisiana has done. And then possibly looking into other avenues like the educators bill, kind of how that worked out, and then kind of that federal funding that Hawaii has, kind of looking at those and seeing how Connecticut could possibly make something like that work. And as we kind of continue, and if I missed something we talked about, please just cut me off and tell us so that we make sure we have record of it. What Gary and I could do, and Gary, if you don't want to do this, just tell me. But what Gary and I could do is we could write up, I know, Peter, you're going to give us a summary, but we can kind of write up the solutions we talked about and kind of run it through everybody on this task force before we go ahead and send it in. And then we don't need to do it right now, but I think we can maybe pull everybody through an email to see who wants to meet again, when we could meet again. And if, you know, we can continue these conversations kind of through this legislative session, because, you know, things, once they get into the legislative session, they'll ebb and flow. And, you know, we'll want to make sure that we're kind of talking with everybody and chatting with everybody about what's going on. Are we good with that? Gary?
Hey, fine with.
Okay, perfect. So when do we want to kind of have everything out to everybody so that everybody can look at it, and then maybe we get some feedback before we then need to send it in?
Peter, how fast is the turnaround from the summary?
I can get it to you guys by Monday if you guys would like.
That would be great.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, I'll get it to you guys by Monday.
Awesome.
And then what's the date? I don't know how many folks here will be at EATA, but we'll provide a summary at the EATA convention at the district, not the district meeting, the state meeting. But if the 15th is in it's in 1.5 weeks, right? 1.5, yep. 1.5 weeks. So I'd say Gary and I can work pretty quickly to turn something around to everybody. So we'll try to shoot to get it out to everybody Wednesday-ish of next week. And then if you could provide us with feedback, and we'll try to send out a final draft before we send it in. The one thing to note is, things will change. And like I said, it kind of ebbs and flows through the session. So, we can make changes or propose changes as, it's a working document, and it'll continue to change as the legislative session progresses. Anybody else have anything else to add? This is great. This is a great conversation.
I have a business question. I
Yes.
know this discussion is open. I generally have to report back to CSMS around this stuff. Is that fine that I share this stuff with their committees and all?
Yeah, I think you can, the links are recorded too, so you could even share the links. And I know, I would be happy to talk with anybody who has more questions. I know the CATA is always happy to talk with anybody who has more questions. Gary likes to talk to people too.
And talk.
Especially on his way home. Gary has a really great mobile office, so if anybody wants to call him in the hours that he has his drive from Southern to home, he does really great business talks. I use them up all the time. But on another note, I just want to thank everybody for being here, for having this discussion. I think it was a great discussion. I think it's great to get all different points of views and actually intentionally, we all talk about this in our separate settings between the physician practice and the doctor's point of view and the AD's point of view and CIAC, and we all seeing different problems in different ways, but to come to the table intentionally to talk about this and control what we can as far as, meeting these barriers, and at the end of the day, just taking care of our student athletes and patients and providing the best care that we can and being as safe as we can is super important. So I think it was, 2 hours kind of flew by a little bit, but I think it was a great conversation, and just super appreciative for everybody at the table.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Any last ideas or things?
Thank you guys, co-chairs.
All right. Thank you, everybody, so much. We look forward to working on this all together.